Welcome back to Crimetime Inc., the Great Train Robbery of 1963. Yeah, we've got historical accounts, investigative reports, even some personal anecdotes from those connected to the case.
It's certainly a case that I think continues to capture the imagination, even after all these years. And the more you dig into the details, the more you realize just how meticulously planned and audacious it really was.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The target was a Royal Mail train traveling from Glasgow to London, August 8th, 1963. But this wasn't just any train. It was carrying millions in cash, 2.6 million to be exact, which is just an incredible sum, even by today's standards.
What's interesting here is that the robbers knew exactly what they were going for and where it would be on the train. They targeted a specific type of train called a traveling post office, essentially a mobile sorting office where postal workers processed mail during the journey. They knew that these trains were a prime target for carrying high-value packages and registered mail.
So they weren't just opportunistic criminals stumbling upon a lucky break. This was a highly organized gang of 15 led by Bruce Reynolds, and they spent months planning this operation down to the last detail. They even went as far as buying a hideout, a rundown farm called Leatherslade Farm, about 27 miles from the planned robbery site.
Their attention to detail is really quite remarkable. They didn't just try to rob the train at any random point along its route. For example, they tampered with the trackside signals near Burdego Railway Bridge. It's a relatively secluded location in Buckinghamshire. They forced the train to halt exactly where they wanted it.
And this wasn't a Hollywood style, guns blazing takeover, was it?
Not at all. Their initial approach was surprisingly nonviolent. They cut all communication lines, overpowered the crew without any firearms initially, and transferred 120 mail bags full of cash to their waiting vehicles, all in just 15 to 20 minutes.
That's like something out of a heist movie. It almost sounds too smooth to be true. Were there any hiccups in their plan?
Well, their efficiency is certainly impressive, but there was one incident that tarnished their clean approach. And sadly, it involved the train driver, Jack Mills.
Yes, I read about that. That's a detail that always sticks with me.
Mills was struck on the head during the robbery, and while the exact circumstances and who delivered the blow are still debated, the consequences for him were severe. He suffered lasting health issues from that injury. It's a stark reminder that even in a meticulously planned crime like this, violence can erupt, and real people can get hurt.
It's easy to get caught up in the thrill of the heist, the almost unbelievable precision with which they executed their plan. But then you remember the human cost, the real-life consequences for innocent people caught in the middle of it all.
It certainly adds a layer of complexity to the story, doesn't it? It challenges us to think about the ethical implications of romanticizing such acts, no matter how cleverly orchestrated they may seem.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder to keep things grounded in reality. Now back to the robbery itself. They managed to stop the train, overpower the crew, get the loot, and escape to their hideout. What happened next? How did their carefully constructed plan start to unravel?
You would think that with all their planning, their escape would be equally flawless. However, it was at Leatherslade Farm, their supposed safe haven. That's where things began to fall apart.
They made some critical errors, didn't they? From what I read, it seemed like a mix of bad luck and perhaps a bit of arrogance.
You're absolutely right. First, they failed to burn the farmhouse down as they had planned. This left a treasure trove of evidence for the police, including fingerprints on that Monopoly board they were using to play with the stolen cash.
Can you imagine the scene? These hardened criminals surrounded by millions in stolen cash, playing Monopoly. It almost sounds like a scene from a dark comedy.
It's a detail that has certainly added to the legend of the case, but more importantly, it speaks to their mindset. It reveals a certain level of detachment, a disconnect from the gravity of their actions, almost as if they believed they were untouchable.
And that belief in their own invincibility,
Yeah,
combined with some bad luck, ultimately led to their downfall.
exactly. They misinterpreted routine RAF training flights in the area as police searches. This panic, coupled with a tip-off to the police from a local farmer who had noticed their suspicious activities, led them to abandon Leatherslade Farm much sooner than intended.
It's ironic, isn't it? They were so meticulous in planning the robbery itself, but their escape plan seemed to unravel due to a series of assumptions and oversights.
It certainly highlights the human element in even the most meticulously planned crimes. They might have accounted for every variable they could think of, but they couldn't predict the unexpected, the seemingly insignificant details that ultimately brought them down.
And those seemingly insignificant details became gold for the investigators, didn't they?
They did. The abandoned farmhouse became a forensic gold mine. The police found fingerprints, train timetables, and even a detailed blueprint of the track layout that the gang had used to plan the robbery.
Wow. They practically handed the police a step-by-step guide to their own crime.
It really was a case of meticulous planning on one hand, and surprising sloppiness on the other. This contrast is, I think, part of what makes this case so fascinating.
It certainly adds another layer to the story, doesn't it? We've got this image of these masterminds pulling off this incredible heist, and then they leave behind a trail of evidence that a rookie detective could follow. It's almost like they wanted to get caught.
That's an interesting thought. Perhaps there was an element of self-sabotage at play, a subconscious desire to get caught. Or maybe they simply became overconfident, believing they were so clever that they couldn't possibly be caught.
It's a possibility, isn't it? It's human nature to sometimes get a bit complacent, especially when you've been successful in the past.
Absolutely. And in their case, that complacency proved to be their downfall. They underestimated the power of even the smallest details and overestimated their ability to control everything.
And the police, of course, were relentless in their pursuit. This wasn't just a local robbery. It became a national obsession. The pressure was on to catch these guys.
The investigation involved Scotland Yard's elite flying squad, who were known for tackling organized crime. Figures like Detective Chief Superintendents Malcolm Futrell, Ernest Millen, and Jack Slipper, they were leading the charge.
These weren't your average beat cops. They were seasoned detectives, used to dealing with complex cases and high-profile criminals.
Exactly. And they brought all their expertise to bear on this case. They meticulously analyzed the evidence, tracked down leads, and gradually built a case against the gang members.
And their efforts, combined with the mistakes made by the robbers, ultimately led to the capture of most of the gang members.
It was a slow and painstaking process, but they eventually brought them to justice. The trial was a media spectacle, with the public hanging on every detail.
The story of the Great Train Robbery is truly one of meticulous planning, audacious execution, and, ultimately, human fallibility. It's a story that continues to fascinate us because it speaks to our own aspirations, our own vulnerabilities, and our own fascination with the unexpected turns that fate can bring.
It does, and it reminds us that even the best-laid plans can go awry. The greatest challenges and the most valuable lessons come from the unexpected turns that fate throws our way.
It's a reminder that life is full of surprises, and that sometimes those surprises can lead to unexpected outcomes, both positive and negative.
That's right. And the Great Train Robbery, for all its drama and intrigue, reminds us that even in a world that often feels increasingly predictable and controlled, there's always room for the unexpected, for those moments of chance that can reshape our lives and rewrite our stories.
Now, we've talked about the robbery,
Yeah.
the hideout, and how it all started to unravel, but this is just the beginning. The story takes many twists and turns from here, and I'm really eager to hear what you have to say about the aftermath and the fates of those involved.
I'm ready to unpack it all.
So the police have their evidence. They've identified at least some of the gang members, and the pressure is on to make arrests. What happened next?
Well, the manhunt was swift and comprehensive. The police used every tool at their disposal: fingerprints, witness accounts, and just good old-fashioned detective work. Within months, they had apprehended most of the gang members.
And these weren't small-time crooks either. These were some of the most notorious figures in the London underworld. Men like Ronnie Biggs, Charlie Wilson, and Buster Edwards. Their capture sent shockwaves through the criminal world.
The trial was a media frenzy, wasn't it? The public was captivated by the story of these daring robbers, who had seemingly pulled off the impossible.
It was a true spectacle, one of the most high-profile criminal trials of the decade. The courtroom was packed, the newspapers were filled with lurid details, and the public seemed divided in their opinions. Some saw the robbers as folk heroes, challenging the establishment, while others condemned their actions as a brazen attack on society.
It's interesting how this case tapped into a broader social conversation about wealth, class, and the perception of authority.
Absolutely. Remember, this was the early 1960s, a time of social change and upheaval in Britain. The old order was being challenged, and perhaps some saw the robbers as symbols of this rebellion, even though their actions were criminal and ultimately harmful.
It's a reminder that even criminal acts can become intertwined with larger social and cultural currents. But let's talk about the sentences. They weren't exactly lenient, were they?
No, they weren't. The judge, Justice Edmund Davies, he was known for his tough stance on crime, and he made it clear that he considered the Great Train Robbery to be a serious offense against the very fabric of society.
He saw it as an attack on more than just the Royal Mail. It was an attack on law and order itself.
Precisely. Most of the gang members received sentences of 30 years. which were considered extremely harsh at the time.
Those sentences sparked a debate about the purpose of punishment. Was it about retribution, deterrence, or rehabilitation?
It's a question that we still grapple with today. And the Great Train Robbery case serves as a reminder that there are no easy answers when it comes to crime and punishment.
It's a balancing act between holding individuals accountable for their actions and creating a system that promotes rehabilitation and reduces recidivism.
Exactly. But let's move on to perhaps the most infamous chapter in this story, the prison escapes.
Oh, yes. The escapes. It's almost as if the story wasn't dramatic enough already.
Several gang members did manage to escape from prison, but the most famous escape, the one that captured the public imagination and cemented the legend of the Great Train Robbery, was Ronnie Biggs' escape from Wandsworth Prison in 1965.
I can only imagine what that must have been like. A high-profile prisoner breaking out of one of the most secure prisons in the country.
It was incredibly audacious. Biggs, along with 3 other inmates, scaled the prison wall using a rope ladder that had been smuggled in. A waiting furniture van whisked them away, and Biggs disappeared into the underworld.
It sounds like something out of a movie.
It really does. And Biggs's escape only added to his notoriety. He became a folk hero for some, a symbol of defiance against authority. He lived a lavish life on the run, first in Australia, then Brazil, taunting the authorities with his every move.
He even released a pop song, didn't he?
He did. And he appeared in a film with the Sex Pistols. He reveled in his notoriety, playing the media game to his advantage.
But his life on the run eventually caught up with him, didn't it?
It did. After decades as a fugitive, Biggs returned to the UK in 2001, his health failing. He was immediately arrested and served the remainder of his sentence.
His story is a testament to the enduring allure of the outlaw, the rebel who thumbs his nose at authority.
It's a reminder that even those who break the law can capture the public imagination, especially if they do it with a certain flair and a touch of humor.
Biggs' escape and his life on the run added another layer of complexity to the Great Train Robbery story. It raises questions about the nature of celebrity, the public's fascination with crime, and the effectiveness of the justice system.
It also highlights the inherent tension between the individual's desire for freedom and society's need for order and accountability.
Those are themes that continue to resonate with us today, aren't they?
Absolutely. And that's why the Great Train Robbery, with its blend of historical fact, human drama, and social commentary, remains such a compelling story, even after all these years.
Now, you mentioned that the gang managed to steal £2.6 million. That's an enormous amount of money. What happened to the loot?
Ah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Literally, most of the money was never recovered. It's a mystery that has fueled speculation and conspiracy theories for decades.
There must be countless stories about buried treasure and secret bank accounts.
Oh, there are, and some of them might even be true. We know that some of the robbers did manage to launder a portion of the money, investing it in property and businesses, but the vast majority of it remains unaccounted for.
It's fascinating to think that this stolen fortune is still out there somewhere, a tangible reminder of this audacious crime.
It's a detail that adds to the mystique of the Great Train Robbery, isn't it? It's a story that, despite its resolution in the courts, still has loose ends, unanswered questions that keep us guessing.
It's almost as if the story itself is a puzzle, with some pieces still missing.
Exactly, and that's part of its enduring appeal. It invites us to speculate, to fill in the gaps with our own theories and interpretations.
It's a story that, despite its ending, still has the power to spark our curiosity and make us wonder what if.
Yeah, it really does have all those elements of like a classic, crime thriller, but it also sparked conversation about the changing social landscape of Britain in the 1960s. The robbers, in a way, became symbols of this rebellion, even if unintentionally. Their audacity, their meticulous planning, and their ability to, kind of outsmart the authorities, at least for a while, really resonated with an anti-establishment sentiment that was brewing at the time.
Right. It's like their crime, while obviously wrong, it kind of tapped into a certain frustration with the status quo, like a desire to see someone challenge the system.
Yeah, and the media coverage at the time amplified this. The robbers were often portrayed almost as charismatic figures, despite, the seriousness of their crimes.
It's really intriguing how our perception of crime can be influenced by the media and the way it's presented. We're so drawn to the drama, the personalities, the intrigue.
It's the human element of the story that makes it so compelling. But it's crucial to remember that these romanticized narratives, they often overshadow the real harm that's caused by criminal acts.
Right. The Great Train Robbery had victims. people whose lives were disrupted and even traumatized by the events of that night.
Exactly. Jack Mills, the train driver, is a prime example. His injuries had a lasting impact on his life and really serve as a reminder there's always a human cost to crime.
Yeah, it's a perspective that sometimes gets lost in all the excitement and fascination surrounding a case like this.
It is. And it's a reminder that while we can analyze and debate the motivations of the criminals and the intricacies of the heist, we should never forget the impact on those who are directly affected by their actions.
It's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Acknowledging the human drama and the intrigue of the story, while remaining grounded in the reality of the crime and its consequences.
Precisely. And that balance is something we should strive for whenever we engage with history, whether it's a dramatic heist like the Great Train Robbery or any other event that shapes our collective memory.
Now, before we wrap up, I just wanted to get your thoughts on something. We talked about the meticulous planning and execution of the robbery, but they also made some pretty glaring mistakes, didn't they?
That's true, they did. The decision not to burn down the farmhouse, leaving all that evidence behind, was a major blunder. And then their panic reaction to the RAF flights, misinterpreting them as police searches. That forced them to flee prematurely.
Yeah, it's almost as if their meticulousness in planning the robbery itself kind of blinded them to the more practical aspects of their escape plan.
Perhaps. It's a reminder that even the most meticulous plans can unravel when you have human error, unforeseen circumstances, and just a bit of bad luck all come into play. And in a way, those mistakes, that's what makes the story so relatable.
Yeah, it's the human element that keeps us engaged, isn't it? The knowledge that even the most cunning criminals are still fallible, capable of making mistakes that can have huge consequences.
Absolutely. And those mistakes, as we've seen, were crucial in helping the police crack the case.
So we had this incredible story, a heist that captivated a nation, a manhunt that spanned continents, and a trial that became a media spectacle. But what I find most fascinating is that, even after all these years, the Great Train Robbery continues to spark debate and discussion.
It does. It raises questions about crime and punishment, social class, the allure of rebellion, and just the complexities of human motivation.
And it makes you wonder how this case would be handled today in our world of, advanced technology and forensic science.
That's a great question. Would the robbers have been caught more quickly? Would the sentences have been as harsh? Would they have achieved the same level of notoriety in our media-saturated age?
These are all questions that we can ponder, but ultimately, we can only speculate. What we do know is that the Great Train Robbery remains a captivating and thought-provoking case, a reminder that history is not just about the past, but about understanding how the past continues to shape our present and influence our future.
I couldn't agree more. And perhaps that's why, even after all these years, the story of the Great Train Robbery still has the power to grip our imaginations and make us think about the forces that shape our world.
I'm really looking forward to hearing what Simon and Tom think about this case in their weekly review on Sunday. But in the meantime, tune in tomorrow for another great true crime episode.